Hello and welcome to our webcast. Moss Adams is pleased that you joined us for today's webcast, Strategies to Strengthen Board Resilience Through DEI. Before we begin, I'm going to play a brief video.
Welcome and thanks for joining. We're pleased to present our continuing professional education webcast series. Before we begin, please keep the following in mind. You can customize how you view our presentation and interact with the presenter. For better viewing, close all other applications and turn up your speaker volume. You can adjust window size and placement or enter full screen mode using the controls at the top right of the window or dragging the bottom right-hand corner to resize. At the bottom of your screen, you'll see a series of icons that relate to a different aspect of our session. You can download a PDF of today's slides from the Slide Deck and Handouts widget. You can ask questions by typing in the Q&A window and clicking Submit. We'll do our best to answer all questions or follow up via email. If you experience technical difficulty, refresh your browser by hitting the F5 key. Today's session offers 1 CPE credit. To receive credit, you must meet the National Association of State Boards of Accountancy requirements. You must attend at least 50 minutes of the session and respond to at least 75% of polling questions. To participate in the polls, please check the button next to your answer within the slide window and click Submit. We'll track your progress and alert you when you've earned CPE credit. You can then click the certificate icon in the CPE Progress widget and download your CPE certificate. Don't worry if you can't download your CPE certificate today. We'll email you a copy in 2 weeks. If attending this webcast in a group, you must complete our group CPE attendance sheet, available in our Slide Deck and Handouts widget to receive credit. Please have all group members sign it and send only 1 sheet per group. CPE credit can only be awarded to participants registered as themselves and isn't available for participants who view the on-demand version. This presentation is not legal, investment, or accounting advice. We encourage you to seek the counsel of a professional service provider to apply this content to your specific circumstances.
And now I would like to introduce the moderators for today's panel discussion. Annie Rose Favreau, Director, and Maria Stroth, Senior Manager at Moss Adams. Their bios and contact information are located in your console, along with our other panelists if you would like more information. Now I'll hand it over to Maria to introduce our panelists and get the discussion kicked off. Maria.
Thank you, Danielle. As Danielle mentioned, I'm Maria Stroth. I'm a senior manager here. I use she, her pronouns. I'm happy to be here as a co-moderator today. And before I pass it to Annie Rose to introduce herself, I did want to share that this session is the last in our 2024 Building Better Boards series. You can see the sessions that we've had previously on the slide here, and you can go onto our website and view those past webcasts at any point. We're also going to be continuing this series in 2025 with some additional sessions on topics like risk management and fundraising best practices. So definitely keep an eye out for more information on future webcasts related to building better boards. Annie Rose, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hello, I'm Annie Rose Favreau. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm a director with Moss Adams team. I specialize in governance, organizational development, and strategic planning for mission-driven organizations. So I spend a lot of my time with boards and leadership teams figuring out how to work more effectively together. So I'm going to be one of your moderators for today, and I think with that, I can pass it back to Maria.
Thank you. So in today's session, we have the pleasure of hearing from 4 experts who all have extensive experience working on and with boards. We'll have a conversation with these leaders about how DEI practices can help your board to face the challenges of the future, including lessons learned and best practices in this space. So I wanted to give a chance for our panelists to introduce themselves. Sutian, I'd like to start with you. Would you like to kick us off?
Great, happy to. Well, hi, everyone. Thank you for being here and thank you for having me. My name is Sutian Tong, and I am I'm here wearing my hat as a board member of Vitamin Angels, which is a global health not-for-profit that focuses on ensuring a world where every mother has healthy pregnancy and babies and young children can receive the nutrition they need to set them up for a beautiful life. And in In my day-to-day, I am a partner at Multitudes, which is a venture capital firm that focuses on investing and incubating ideas that expand the edge of human consciousness. My background has been largely focused on women's health, women-led companies, women-led not-for-profits, and really thinking about what the world might look like if we were to create a world where equity and opportunity are more evenly distributed.
Thank you. And Julie, over to you.
Hi, everyone. I am Julie Ziegler. I'm CEO, Executive Director of Humanities Washington. We are a state humanities council that is affiliated with the National Endowment for the Humanities, but an independent nonprofit with an independent board of trustees. Our mission is to create spaces to explore different perspectives in order to open minds and bridge divides. We do this in collaboration with hundreds of organizations across the state of Washington every year, with more than 400 events each year. Our primary programs are a humanities speakers bureau with 35 humanities scholars available for talks to the general public, a family reading program that helps young readers who are lagging a bit behind their peers and presented in partnership with libraries. We have a Heritage Arts Apprenticeships program that supports master artists and their apprentices over a year-long period. And I have been in my position now for about 15 years, and before serving as executive director, was actually on the board of Humanities Washington. I have also served on several professional association boards at a regional and national level, as well as some charitable foundation boards. It's great to be here today. Thank you.
Thank you, Julie. Tamika?
Yes, hi, good afternoon and morning for some. I'm Tamika Tremaglio, and it is a pleasure to be here today. I am the managing partner of TA Sports Ventures, which is focused on reimagining sports throughout the world. Prior to that, I was the executive director of the National Basketball Players Association, which makes up the 450 players or 500, depending on the day, that make up the NBA. I retired from Deloitte in Washington as the managing partner there, where we had about 17,000 professionals in 23 offices. So I'm really enjoying my time serving on boards. I have served in over 20 boards. Currently, I'm involved with 8 boards. I've served on the audit committee, the nominating and governance committee, the executive committee of boards. So now a couple of institutions, so Tuskegee is one, of course, University of Maryland Law, which I chair. I graduated there just a few years ago. And then, of course, I'm also on Born This Way Foundation, which is where I had the pleasure of working with Moss Adams. And I am the treasurer of that, which was co-founded by Lady Gaga and Cynthia Germanata, her mother.
Thank you, Tamika. Over to you, Kinman.
And Kinman, you might be on mute.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Rounding this out, my name is Kinman Tong. I'm a partner with Moss Adams in our nonprofit and government practice with a big focus on education and healthcare. And I do wear a different hat at Moss Adams as well. I am the co-chair of our Inclusion and Diversity Board that drives all about strategies and impact work in our goal of becoming an anti-racist firm. And part of, I would say, I get to do I get to do work in the passionate space, which is in healthcare and education, and part of that is serving on boards. So I am the treasurer and board member of Asian Health Services, which is a nonprofit federally qualified health centers that focus on providing healthcare, social services, and advocacy services to everyone, regardless of income or various status and language and culture as well. And that's headquartered in Oakland, California, where there is significant needs for health equity, access, and whatnot. And I'm also on the board of Aurora Theater Company, which is a local nonprofit theater company based in Berkeley, California, that strives to do what we call, inspire new audience and longtime theater lovers with the visceral power of live theater, with a big focus on diverse and inclusive art performances as well. So glad to be part of this panel to kind of share a lot of the work that we do in this space as well. Thank you. Maria.
Thank you, Kinman. What an inspiring group of people. Thank you all so much for being here. We're excited about the conversation. Before we get started, I'm going to pass it over to Danielle to have our first polling question so we can learn a little bit more about who's in the audience today.
Wonderful. Thank you. And here's our first poll. What is your role in your organization? A, board member, B, committee member, C, executive director, CEO, D, management, E, staff, F, other, not applicable. The polls are located in the slide window, so do make sure you have that open up on your screen. I'll give you a few moments to respond. To respond, please click the button next to the answer you choose and hit submit. If you can't see the submit button, please enlarge that slide area. All right, we'll give everybody just a few more moments here. And the results.
All right, so it looks like we've got a pretty good spread here. We have quite a few folks from management teams, I'm assuming, and from the staff perspective as well. So thinking about the boards that we are supporting and working with, and we'll certainly be speaking to that. But nice to see that we have some board members, committee members here as well. So thank you all for that. We will be doing periodic polls throughout this session as we go as part of the CPE. So with that, I would love to get us started on some of the questions that we have for this great panel here. And I know that each of you, as you've already mentioned, you fulfill many different roles. So for this first one, I'm going to ask you to think about maybe one or two primary boards that you work with or serve on. And it'd be great to hear a little bit more about maybe about your role there, but also what motivated that particular board or boards to focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion practices. So I'd love to hear from each one of you on this question. And Sutian, if you could kick us off, that would be fantastic.
Sure, of course. So I'm happy to talk about Vitamin Angels and my role there. So Vitamin Angels, and I should have mentioned this at the beginning, serves about a little over 70 million women and children annually by partnering with almost 1,300 organizations globally. And I was actually initially brought into the board role at Vitamin Angels, I want to say this was late 2020, because Vitamin Angels was looking to expand the diversity of its board. Vitamin Angels historically has worked with many organizations in the natural foods, the pharmaceutical spaces, and given my background in women's health and technology, and especially as a woman, with the focus of Vitamin Angels, they were really looking to really expand the aperture of the board members, right, and what they could bring to the table. And so it was, I think Vitamin Angels' first foray into really thinking strategically about, okay, well, what does, how do we think 5-10 years ahead in the growth of the organization, and start not just bottoms up, but also tops down in figuring out how to leverage different perspectives, different networks, different points of view to better enable the organization to serve the women, babies, and young children at a greater scale.
Fantastic. I love hearing that direct connection between the mission that you have, the work that you are doing, and why this work was happening at the board level. Thank you. Who would like to speak to that question next? All right, I'm going to nominate Julie then.
I was just unmuting myself. So Humanities Washington, as I mentioned, is our state's humanities organization. And the humanities are our collective stories. And without true equity and inclusion, what stories are told, by whom they are told, how they are told, we aren't really representing the humanities. Also, I think it's really important to recognize that there's a history of bias and exclusion in who, when, and how people's stories are told. cultural awareness and cultivating a sense of belonging really necessitates that we as an organization are steeped in equitable and inclusionary practices. And this includes our staff, the partners that we work with on the ground throughout the state, and our leadership and board. So that's really what has motivated us to, and our board. I work in a support role as the executive director, helping facilitate training and conversations at the board level. But that is really what drove our board to, and continues to drive our board to become just more equitable and inclusive.
Thank you. Tamika, over to you.
Sure. So the board I will speak about is Born This Way Foundation, which has been in existence now for a little over 12 years. As I mentioned previously, it was founded by Lady Gaga and her mother, Cynthia Germanata. And the goal, the mission of our organization is really to inspire young people and to make it a kinder, braver world that supports mental health. So our primary objective is to sort of lessen the stigma that is associated with mental health. But in addition, they spend a significant amount of time doing a lot of research around the topic, as well as programs. So whether it's the Be There certificate that we're involved in, or Channel Kindness, or Be Kind, used to be Be Kind 21 days. Now it's turned into Be Kind 365 days. And then we also have a Kick Fund where we support organizations as well. And to be quite honest, in terms of the diversity, equity, and inclusion, it's just, responsible governance, right? We need to represent the people that we are serving. And so it was a given in terms of the overall board. When we think about it in terms of a diversity of thought, however, we certainly wanted to make sure that we had the skill sets covered. So we have board members who have PR background, we have board members who have financial background like myself, and we understand by having a diverse board that it really drives the overall performance. It makes us better at what we do. It's also part of our overall brand and reputation, and we want to make sure that our board members, as well as our advisory board members, are really championing the values that are important to our mission.
Yeah, thank you. Kinman, want to round us out here?
Yeah, I think, I think all the panelists that's kind of hit on, why we all serve on board is to essentially make sure we represent a voice, but represent perspective. But that's both professional, but also I'll call it, what each of us bring with us, with our life experiences and backgrounds and whatnot. So a lot of that essentially is what I bring to two of my board roles, right? Both Aurora and Asian Health. And a lot of that comes with my perspective as a CPA, an accounting, finance, the numbers person, which sometimes is lost a lot of times. And at least actually on both of the boards, I'm also one of the younger board members as well, which is also something that's well needed, just because, as Tamika mentioned, you want to make sure that it represents the community that you serve, that the audiences that you are providing live to the performance to, so that you can provide those perspective and objective as well. So I think it's truly important for every nonprofit and even for-profit organization out there to evaluate how can you ensure inclusion in your representation as well. So important work that we all do, and glad that we are spending some time talking more about it today.
Thank you so much for sharing that kind of contextual information. And I think that'll set this next question up nicely, which is, I would love to get into kind of the nitty gritty here. We've been talking a big picture, sort of the motivation behind this work, but can you share some specific examples of how your board has implemented diversity, equity, and inclusion practices? What has been working really well? Have there been any challenges in implementing these practices? Give us a little bit of the detail of what this actually looks like on each of your boards. And maybe we can just keep the same flow that we've been doing so far, and we can kick it off with Sutian.
Great. Awesome. So one thing I would like to highlight, just that the answers that we all just previously gave, is that I do find it very interesting and great that I believe that on our various roles on the board, we've all thought about diversity in a holistic way. right? So diversity goes way deeper than what you can see. It's the culmination of joint lived experiences. And that obviously has enormous impact in terms of the flow through from the board all the way down to the constituents that are served. And so it is a welcome evolution, I think, in terms of how the board members here think about serving on boards, and also think about the real impact that that a focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion can make across an organization. And so to go back to your question, Annie, and talk about the nitty gritty, Vitamin Angels over the last we'll call it 5-7 years has experienced a tremendous wave of growth, which has created the necessity for the organization to grow up and mature and create systems and processes for things that we didn't necessarily need in the past. And one of these initiatives is an operational scorecard that the organization has created. And this includes DEI initiatives that were first we'll call it institutionalized in 2020, 2021, and that is very much a grounds up initiative, not necessarily coming from the board, but coming from the employees and the staff at Vitamin Angels who wanted to create the structure such that diverse voices and diverse perspectives across the organization could be heard, and concerns could be bubbled up to the right folks, so that initiatives could be created, right, that both positively affect the staff of Vitamin Angels and the constituents that and the mothers and children that we cover. So that is an example of something that was created, less than 5 years ago, that has made tremendous positive impact within the organization. And that scorecard is updated and reported to the board on a quarterly basis, and overall refreshed annually. And that's been very helpful in creating transparency across the entire organization of what we're focusing on, how well are we doing it, and what should we change for the future such that those goals and initiatives can be completed faster.
And I love hearing the combination of not only, it sounds like you're tracking important information, but also using that to then make decisions, make shifts, make adjustments. Has that been how that tool has flowed for you?
Absolutely. I think with any organization that is growing quickly, there is a balance between creating goals that people are setting themselves up for and going for, and also being flexible to the reality that things change, right? So how do you make sure that the goals are there to create clarity for the organization, while also recognizing that the goals that you set at the beginning of Q1 2024 may need to evolve, right, to reflect a growing, changing organization in Q1 2025.
Yeah, absolutely. Julie, what would you add to the picture?
Sure. I think that, it might be helpful to talk a little bit about our experience just initiating the process. We are, as I mentioned, we serve the state of Washington, and that means more urban progressive communities and perhaps smaller rural communities, not to generalize too much, but we really do look for diversity in a lot of different aspects of our board. Certainly expertise, gender, age, racial, geographical diversity. And that often means that people are coming to our board with a commitment to the humanities, most definitely, but different lived experiences and different at different places in their diversity, equity, and inclusion diversity. I think if I had to give an example, I'd say just at the very beginning, we had a couple of false starts in trying to get the board all on the same page that were actually quite damaging because consultants would try to fast track the process. And our board took a deep breath, and after several false starts, came together actually during the pandemic and on Zoom participated in some multi-day sessions that really set the foundation for equity and inclusion practices in our organization. The consultants we used were terrific. They interviewed BIPOC board and staff, and through that process, trustees began to see their own implicit bias differently, and our staff were able, and our BIPOC staff and board were able to surface issues in a really safe place. So as a result, we identified some areas where we hadn't been as flexible before and needed to create safe ways for folks to show up. And a lot of this work happens around the margins, right? You look at your core operations and they're fine, but it's the conversations that happen during breaks. It's the reception to different people's perspectives in a board meeting conversation. Those are the things that we felt needed fine-tuning. So in several cases, it requires an adjustment on the financial side, just thinking how people are going to bring resources to their own personal giving to the organization or travel on behalf of the organization. And so I'd say those were the areas, in addition to a mindset shift, there were also some operational things that we needed to work out, but it's absolutely been worth any expense we would have incurred. So maybe I'll leave it there and happy to answer questions later, of course.
Great. So it sounds like laying that foundation, having a really good partner in the consultants that you're working with, and then making some of those operational changes, all of those pieces were going together there. Excellent. Tamika, what do you want to bring into this conversation?
So what I would say specifically as it relates to Born This Way Foundation is I was actually one of their first outsiders. So because their entire board was made up of insiders initially, and I've now been on the board for about 6 years. So what I mean by that is that, the people who were involved in HR or PR or legal, et cetera, they were already making up the board. So they saw that there was a need to do things beyond that. And one, I think they also had a very, clear matrix. So I think when Sutian talked about the organizational scorecard, very much like that, they needed someone with finance background. And at the time when I first met Cynthia, I was really focused on mental health and the business of kindness within the Big Four. I thought that it was critically important that, obviously our younger people were growing up. And if they weren't getting the right resources and support, then we'd find that you'd come into the corporate environment and bully in those environments as well. So we wanted to make sure that we were setting the foundation where people could talk and engage on things like that. And so I think that clearly Lady Gaga and Cynthia saw that this is a way to bring in a different perspective. So not only, from the finance background, but also having a different perspective in the corporate world. So that was sort of the beginning of that. Since we've had other board members as well, like Alex Roquet, for instance, who is also involved in a similar not-for-profit, so he can bring forth the experience that he has in a not-for-profit. There are 6 actual board members that are part of Born This Way Foundation. But what we also recognize, because we're always evolving, is that we needed the perspective of the youth, right? We had 14 staff members who do an incredible job of communicating with our youth. They understand what's happening on the ground. We've done all of the research. But the reality is, having them represented in a way that was meaningful or that could add to the things that we were doing was significant. So we then launched a global advisory board. So we have 31 students or young people who make up that advisory board, and we go to them to ask them questions, to be engaged in what we're doing, to execute on that, because it's really critical that they are the voices out in the community as well. So, obviously our boards can be used in different ways, but we can appreciate that having the diversity, not only of gender and ethnicity, but even of age, can be significant as we're talking about mental health.
I am such a big fan of a board matrix as a place to begin to start to identify what voices are we missing, right? And all 4 of you have spoken to that and the importance of those pieces. So thank you for that example. Kinman, round us out here.
I think a lot of what we have a lot of both the organization work with, right? I've kind of mentioned how I got brought on was to bring a diverse perspective based on my background and whatnot. But one of the uniqueness, especially Aurora Theater has kind of worked in DEI space, has been trying to the board and the management teams kind of working on how do we embody a lot of inclusive and diversity and equity approaches in terms of how we put on shows, right? Performances and whatnot. And a lot of that has been focusing on how do we ensure all the different perspectives, not just your Shakespeare's or your musicals, are presented to the audience for entertainment purposes, but other educational stories or new generations of writers who can be brought forth. And so this has been super helpful in telling new stories that does focus on inclusion, on dismantling, different oppressions and whatnot, and also kind of focusing on new stories that are different background in terms of languages and cultures as well. So one of the commitments that the board and the management have done is we'll work on trying to ensure equity in just actors that are being hired, tiered directors, and even writers that they are part of the performances, just to make sure that we live what we preach, not just be reflected internally, but also externally as well, which essentially is very, very similar to what we at Moss Adam try to do in our goal of being an anti-racist firm, not internally only, but in our communities as well. So it's just replicating that wherever we see in all our communities.
Fantastic. All right, well then I'm going to hand it back over to Danielle really quickly to get to our second polling question before we can turn it back to you all for our follow-up questions here. Danielle.
Thank you. Here we are at poll question number 2. How would you characterize your board's current relationship with diversity, equity, and inclusion work? A, we are just starting out and/or struggling in this area. B, we've been doing this work for a while, but need to continue to strengthen our practices. C, we are well versed in this area and looking to take our work to the next level. As a reminder, if you would like to receive CPE credit for today's webcast, you will need to respond to at least 3 of the 4 polling questions. And we'll leave this up for just a few more moments here. Just a reminder that the polling questions are found within the slides. So if you're not able to see them, please make sure your slide view is open. Take a look at the bottom of your screen there. There's some widgets, and find the one that says slides and click that one open. If that still doesn't work, please hit refresh on your screen by clicking F5. Okay, and the results.
Okay, great. Thank you. Looks like we have a lot of folks in the middle, but a pretty good spread. So some folks getting started and many folks sort of looking to strengthen their DEI practices, which is great. We're hoping this panel is helping you get some ideas so far already. So we've talked a little bit about how important the composition of the board is and thinking about the diversity of our board. And also then once we have a diverse board, how do we make sure the board is sort of accessible to the different people who are serving on the board? I'd love to hear a little bit about how each of your boards that you're working with has what sort of impact you've seen from doing this work to increase the diversity of your board, to increase the accessibility of your board. What are some specific examples that you can share with our audience today? And I'll mix it up a little bit and maybe start with Kinman. I think you're on mute.
Sorry. So the accessibility of the board has been super helpful in bringing a new generation of voices, right? I think that has been impactful especially at Royal Theatre, is new perspective that hasn't been on the board in terms of a young professional, in terms of an educator. That has been super helpful in just looking at what is the future audience of the theater that we are looking forward to. Because a lot of I'll call supporter and theater goers, are people who are passionate about it and have always gone back to it. But the pandemic has changed a lot of that, just because a lot of us have stayed home, and enjoyed, I'll say, entertainment in a very different way. So part of that has allowed us to think beyond what has been the norm or what is usual, and approaching it as how do we bring this to students? How do we bring this to young professional? Is it a subscription model, or do we want a different model in bringing the new theater goers who might not want to commit for the whole season, but want to pick their shows and whatnot. So that has been helpful in us rethinking the world of theater and arts, and being impactful and actually helping us work through facing challenges. And a lot of that is just changing how we see things, right? Not hey, the organization needs to have all these different roles. Maybe it has to be different as we evolve as well. And so that has been super helpful with the new composition of the diversity of our board. So.
Yeah, really helping you to see things in terms of how to maybe do things differently, how might we sort of evolve to meet our mission. That sounds great. Julie, what would you like to add?
Sure. I love to share specific examples in case they help others. So I have a few in terms of how equity and inclusion has improved the quality of our organization's work just in recent months, years and months. I'd say one of the biggest things having a more diverse board has done for us is that it gives me as executive director and a link to our programs a really valuable sounding board and ins, if you will, in terms of communities where I, as a white cisgendered woman, would need to spend a lot of time nurturing trust to build a collaborative relationship. And to be clear, all relationships need to move at the speed of trust. But one of our trustees introduces me to a new contact or a new network, we're fast-tracked down that path a bit, and everybody really benefits. I'd say another way, we're just finishing up budgeting for this coming year. And I think one big shift I've seen is when staff make requests for our coming budget cycles for accommodations around that would help create more inclusion and accessibility. I see a lot more willingness and prioritization on these types of requests. Some folks used to be skeptical that do we really need to do this, based on their own lived experience. And now through a lot of equity and inclusion work, they can appreciate a variety of perspectives and understand that in order to access our programs, we need to adjust for a lot of different folks. So that's been really heartening to see. I think probably another example, we recently had a staff issue come up. And because of some input around the table, particularly from our BIPOC trustees, I was able to identify some additional areas where we needed to do some contingency planning, and also received caution around what not to do in this particular situation. And it was just invaluable. So I value my board members' perspectives so much on all of this as advisors to our organization. And so those are three recent examples.
Yeah, I love those examples. They really illustrate how sort of the board's composition and the board's focus on DEI can really have such an impact on your programming of your organization and on management practices and sort of how we operate. Tamika, what would you like to add?
Yeah, so Maria, I would say too, very, very similarly to what Julie mentioned, I think it also starts with the tone at the top, right? It's sort of, getting that sort of inclusive culture. And fortunately, on Born This Way Foundation, Cynthia is a phenomenal leader who really wants to promote inclusivity. And so I think a couple of examples for us we saw prominently in COVID, right? Because quite frankly, there were so many individuals who were challenged with mental health at all levels, right? And I think from our perspective, it was interesting to hear from our advisory board members to sort of share some of the things that people were talking about or doing, whether it was in colleges or universities. We knew during that time we had our suicide rate was going up significantly. That is when we started implementing the Be There their certificate, and that was as a result of what was occurring during that time. We also know that culturally, mental health is looked at very differently. So as a board member, I was able to say, in our African-American community, we typically would go to church. We didn't see the need to necessarily go to talk to a therapist or get things out. And, for a lot of people, that was very foreign. That wasn't something they were expecting to hear. And it was important for us to be able to engage in that dialogue. But again, it also meant that the board members, as well as our constituents, were willing to receive that information. So we shifted and thought about, how do we reach different communities? How do we make sure that everyone feels safe and is looking at mental health in a way that reduces the stigma? Being with the NBA players, I will tell you, many of them had talked a lot about mental health. And so, CJ McCollum would talk about going to therapy as if you were going to a dentist appointment. And so that became really critical, because as a rookie, if you hear someone more senior saying, I'm going to therapy, then you think, oh, if they can do it, then I can do it. And we brought that into Born This Way Foundation. We did a global mental health symposium with the NBPA, in which Born This Way Foundation was a part of it, and talked about the things that they were doing and how they were promoting discussions around mental health. So I think, given the diverse backgrounds of the individuals who are on the board, as well as our staff and our advisory members, it makes a difference in how we execute and deliver on the mission that has actually been employed.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I love that example, just sort of thinking about how when we model diverse and inclusive practices and sort of we have that openness, how much influence it can have on sort of others and throughout the organization. Sutian, do you want to add anything to this question? And you're on mute.
I'm happy to. I was saying that all the other panelists have done an incredible job of talking about many of the themes that are resonant with Vitamin Angels as well. Two, I think, general points I would add. One is that I do believe that on a board level, Vitamin Angels has definitely seen a snowball effect with its DEI efforts. And what I mean by that is, there is inertia in everything. And so when you first get started with going down the path of figuring out, okay, what does, thoughtful implementation of DEI practices within an organization look like? The going can feel a little bit slow until it starts picking up speed. And a great example of that is certainly on a board level. If you already have a diverse board, it becomes more easy to recruit diverse board members, because it is clear to prospective board members, that a focus on diversity has already been implemented within the organization. And so they are not going to be the one of one, right? And so I think when the path has been trodden, almost like, as Tamika was mentioning, with the rookies in the NBA, right? When you have examples of something that has already been done, it becomes much easier to recreate or to follow in the footsteps. And the second thing I will say as well is that I think with effective implementation of DEI practices, what it really does is positively and permanently shift the culture of an organization. And so there is, when organizations talk the talk and walk the walk, there is this sense of ability, right, across the organization, of being able to bring up things and asking for new processes to be implemented, for example, that might benefit staff. I felt a little bit just shy, right, about bringing things up in the past. And so I do think this cultural shift is a little bit more intangible, but it's still really important, because that's the piece of it that makes you feel welcome when you go in somewhere, right? Where you walk into an organization, walk into a room, walk into a meeting, and say, oh, I don't know what it is, but I know I have this feeling that what I say and the value that I bring to the table will be welcome here. And that kind of intangible, I think, is incredibly important in creating long-lasting positive change within an organization.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know that we want to do another poll real quick. So we'll pass it to Danielle to do poll 3, just to make sure everyone's getting their CPE today.
Thank you, Maria. Poll number 3. What is your board's biggest challenge with encouraging diversity, equity, and inclusion practices? A, lack of knowledge. B, lack of alignment or disagreement around the importance of this work. C, difficulty implementing the ideas in a practical way. D, not enough time. E, something else. For those of you that would like a copy of today's slides, you can download them from the folder that says Slide Deck and Handouts. We will also be sending this email tomorrow, along with a recording of the webcast. I'll go ahead and keep this up for just a few more moments so we can continue on with our discussion. Wonderful. And the results.
Okay, let's see what we have here. A nice spread. Seems like lots of folks are having difficulty implementing the ideas in a practical way. So really getting started. I know we've definitely seen this. It takes time, right? It takes some time to get some practices in there, start to see that impact. So I'm not surprised to see that's where a lot of folks are right now. And Sutian, you mentioned a little bit about sort of the snowball effect and sort of the evolution of this process. And you kind of talked a little bit about how it can take time. I'd love to hear from you to get us started around how your board has sort of measured the success of your DEI practices. You talked a little bit about the operational scorecard, so I would love to hear a little bit more about that and just how you've sort of been able to use metrics to track progress in this space.
Absolutely. So I won't go down the DEI scorecard line by line, but on a high level, I would say that, I think for Vitamin Angel's effective implementation of DEI practices has been an ongoing initiative. And I think effective implementation of DEI practices is a process that doesn't really ever end within an organization. This isn't a project that's done and everyone's like, great, good job, let's move on to the next thing. But this is more of a commitment to creating a culture, right, of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And that is something that is not a one and done project. A couple of things here. One, I do believe that it was very important for Vitamin Angels when we started this process to create time in the beginning to listen to all constituents and all staff across seniority levels within the organization and develop a baseline of what is working, right? What can be improved before taking a step back to create an operational plan that is in process, is being implemented over the course of several years. Right. I do believe that that kind of thoughtfulness is important in the process. And coupled with that, what is really important is a board, and not just board, but senior level commitment to seeing the process through. Right. Changes like this that affect organizations do not happen overnight. And because of that, I do think it is imperative, right, that the belief that there is a tangible benefit to creating diversity, equity, and inclusion within an organization. That belief drives the implementation of our practices ahead of necessarily seeing tangible positive effects. And so now with, we're in end of 2024, which is time passes very quickly. If you look at the last 3-4 years of creating this process, now we're seeing that some of the items in the operational plan that we had been measuring ever since 2020-21 are coming to fruition, but it takes a bit of time, right, to make sure that, one, the metrics that you're deciding to measure are the right metrics, right, and two, knowing that organizational change doesn't happen overnight. And so having that commitment from the top down creates, I think, a lot of trust within the organization that this is something that is not a nice to have or something that's good to talk about, but a real commitment to changing culture for the better.
Absolutely. I think the importance of that commitment is so key here. Tamika, what would you like to add?
I would just say, I mean, honestly, to piggyback on what Sutian has said, I think it is first, speaking from the consultant's viewpoint here, everything starts with assessing kind of where you are, right? And the tone at the top is what's leading it. And I know Julie mentioned earlier, BoardSource has a great board assessment, self-assessment tool that you could use, but that helps to start setting the foundation. Where are you now in terms of your diversity of your board? You start there. Then you want to make sure that you're now setting a goal. Where do you want to be? And then you want to make sure your tone at the top is setting it such that you have an inclusive behavior. People feel like they want to include others. I cannot tell you the number of times when I've heard people say, I can't get a diverse candidate to be on the board. Well, we all know that there are diverse candidates out there. But in addition, there are recruiting firms that are set up just to look for diverse candidates. And so whether it's a not-for-profit board or a for-profit board, there are opportunities for diverse candidates to get more engaged. And so I think we can sort of alleviate that as an excuse for not getting them, because they are out there. Even I've seen lately, even on LinkedIn, they are looking for, not-for-profit, not paid board positions, but certainly to give people experiences. So there certainly are opportunities for that. And then you need to track the actual progress. Where are you? And how long is it going to take you to get there? Provide the right training so that your board also understands the importance of it. We know that businesses do so much better when they have the opportunity to have diverse thinking, right? And so if it's because you need to train your board members, so there's unconscious bias that plays a role, it's not helpful to have board members that are diverse if you don't allow them to speak or voice their opinion, or put them in a setting where they feel comfortable voicing their opinion. So that has to be part of the overall process as well. And then leading by example, which I have had the privilege of having our leaders lead by example so people feel like they're engaged in a more inclusive environment.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think that's great, pointing to some resources that folks can use to sort of advance this work forward, and just sort of reminding everyone that it's sort of start with something, track it, see how it's working, adjust, and kind of continue that process. We're going to go ahead and launch poll 4 before we dig into our last question. Danielle, over to you.
Thank you. Everybody, this is our final poll question of the day. What areas of continuing education would be most useful to your board? A, incorporating DEI into our board recruiting practices. B, incorporating DEI in our bylaws, policies, and procedures. C, incorporating DEI into our meeting practices. D, all of the above. E, something else. Once you have completed all CPE requirements, you will be able to download a PDF of your certificate from the CPE progress window. I'm going to give everybody just a few more moments to respond to our final poll of the day. And here are the results.
Great. Again, oh, right, we've got a lot of all of the aboves coming in on this one. So it looks like, and that kind of makes sense with the folks. We know we had a lot of people who are in that process of strengthening and figuring out how do we actually bring this into implementation. All right, well, this hour has absolutely flown by and we only have a few minutes left here, but I would love to hear what are some final words of advice, a minute or two from each of you for any boards, any organizations that are looking to do this work. What would be 1 or 2 takeaways, things that you'd like to pass along to the folks in the audience today? And I'm gonna start with Julie.
All right. I think, just overall, I have kind of a phrase, have courage, create space. I think that's the most important thing to do in this arena. People are at just such vastly different places in terms of their DEI journey, respecting that, creating space for that, and just treating it with persistence but grace is so important. I'd also say don't shortcut. Really take the time, commit, put in the work, and it will absolutely pay dividends.
Fantastic. Kinman.
I would just add, I think one suggestion I have is something that it has been, I would say, most successful in Moss Adams, in the sense that our DEI governance and even our goals has always been rooted at what our people want, what our people are striving to do, and the impact that they're trying to do. So a lot of that has driven our, I'll say, momentum forward. And that's also have been helpful in us developing like our business resource group, our Giving Tuesday program, and also even our grant making program. So a lot of those have been super helpful. So I always say, all of you have a lot of people that work in your nonprofit, right, as boards or management. Go back to them and ask them how do they want to add value in the inclusion and equity and diversity effort, because they want to feel belonging in the organization, and that drives so much more impact in the long run as well.
Mm-hmm. Tamika.
I would say to be intentional about DE&I, right? I think that people tend to do things that are measured. And so finding a way to measure your performance and how you're doing against your goals, you're more likely to be successful at it. It gives people some accountability, because I have found that when you don't, that it is less likely to happen. So be very intentional in what you're doing and hold people accountable for it.
Sutian.
I would add that I think it was very beneficial, or maybe two things. One, I think every organization is different, right? Organizations are comprised of people. People are all different. That is one of the beautiful parts of being in organizations, in that what works for one may not work for another. And so I believe that what we're all saying here should serve as inspiration for folks at other organizations, but not necessarily a play-by-play playbook of what to do, because each company, each not-for-profit, each project can be really different depending on who's involved. That being said, one of the things that we found to be quite instrumental in moving the conversations and the projects around DEI at Vitamin Angels forward was the formation very early on of a DEI council that was not from the board down, right, but from the staff and the organization up. And that included folks across all seniority levels, such that we were making sure that various voices, various experiences were being heard. And we made a commitment to supporting that council and that role, because I think that's one of the integral parts of creating an inclusive organization, right? Making sure that all voices around the table are heard, such that all voices around the table can be respected and put in positions to do their best work.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you all so much for coming together today, for sharing your wisdom, sharing your experiences here. We so appreciate your time and the perspective that you bring to this conversation. And with that, I think that we are at the hour. So Danielle, I'm going to hand it back to you to close us out here.
Thank you, Annie Rose and Maria, for moderating our discussion today. We would also like to extend a special thank you to our wonderful panelists for sharing their valuable insights with our audience. To our audience, if you have any further questions or comments, please reach out to us, as we would be happy to continue the conversation. You can drop a note in the Q&A window or reach out to our presenters directly. Their contact information is in your console. If you were unable to attend some of the previous webcasts in our series, I'd like to highlight the image in the upper right-hand corner of your console. Here you will find curated content from our professionals, specifically tailored for board members, management teams, and committees. Recordings are available for your convenience. If you met all CPE requirements, your certificate is available to download now in the CPE progress window. A copy will be emailed within 3 weeks should you have any trouble downloading it now. And finally, here's a link to an online survey for today's presentation. Thank you for joining our webcast, and we hope you'll join us again next time.